Welcome to the latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob Staton and Jeff Simmons with you here today to discuss the big Seahawks topics. Apologies that we're a little bit late. It's all my fault on my end, but we got there in the end. If you want to get involved, you can do via the live chat. People are already talking away in there. Any super chats will be prioritized, and it is the best way to get your questions answered or your views heard this evening. Right, Jeff, welcome along. Let's start with the confirmed coaching changes, which have now been announced by the Seahawks, adjustments to the offensive staff, additions as well to the defensive staff. How do you feel about the changes that the Seahawks have made to the coaches?
I thought the search was a little odd and a little up and down, but overall the results were really promising. I know from being on your shows and other shows that I've done, I've been really critical of Pete in terms of the staff he's put together in the last few years. So last year, I know you were talking about this, that like there was a lot of case that for Pete to get fired. So just say Pete got fired last year. Was there one guy on the staff that could have been an interim coach? Like I couldn't think of any. And we've seen it for years where there hasn't been a head coaching interview come from this staff. And really, I don't think he's surrounded himself with enough good coaches. So to see someone like Sean Desai, who's considered one of the up and comers in the industry, what I liked about him is he's not from Pete's tree. He's a little different. He's developed in a different way. And no, he didn't get a lot of those defensive coordinator jobs, but it's just good to add people to the staff who are fresh. They think a little differently. They have ascending talent. Carl Scott is another guy. He's the new DB coach. We don't know what he'll be like in the pros. He's only been there 1 year, but he's fresh eyes. He's a little different than what Pete's brought in the past. So I thought those two, and Clint Hurt was not the most exciting defensive coordinator hire, but he's really well respected in the building. And now that he's surrounded himself with a much better staff, I think I can wrap my head around that one a little more. There was a lot of big name DCs out there, like a weird amount at once. Like you had Mike Zimmer get let go, Vic Fangio get let go, and then Wink Martindale from Baltimore, Patrick Graham, all these guys came free at once. So to end up with Clint Hurt, if that was the only hire, it would have been really, really discouraging. But I thought they put together a nice staff. I think the offensive line coach switch makes sense. I don't think it's something we get like super excited about. I just think they're leaning more into what Shane Waldron's doing. And Shane Waldron brought the new offensive line coach in. So overall, I think it's been promising, but as much as we can find good things to say about it, I think the Seahawks issues go way beyond coaching. I think it's purely personnel problems. And if they don't fix their personnel, the coaching changes will not matter.
I always think with a coaching staff and generally with the makeup of a team, I think as fans, you just want to believe in what the plan is and the direction the team is going. And I do think this is a plan with the coaches that fans can buy into. They can have a little bit of excitement about. Doesn't mean that it's going to work. And, I've got some reservations, Jeff, that it could be a case of too many cooks, and I hope that Hurt and Desai and Carl Scott are heard and they have their voices heard, and then they can all come together, and how Pete Carroll fits into this, because ultimately you imagine he's still going to have a huge say. So you want them all to come together. But I think it's a good look for the Seahawks to have some fresh blood in there. And it's not just the three names that we've been talking about on the defensive side. Shane Waldron's a young guy. Andy Dickerson's a younger guy. There's new blood within this coaching staff. And that is a stark difference from Ken Norton Jr., Carl Tater Smith, and those kind of appointments, which were very much just Carroll guys. And I can remember a year ago being a little bit worried at some of the guys that were being linked with the offensive coordinator job, because they too just had connections to Carroll. And you think, here we go again. But actually, in fairness to Pete Carroll, who you and I have been critical of, he has gone outside of his tree, not necessarily with Clint Hurt, but with some of these other guys, the offensive coordinator is now his new associate head coach for defense. I'm not quite sure what the title means, but Sean Desai is here. And with Carl Scott, he's gone outside of perhaps even his comfort zone to bring guys in. And I think fans can like that fact and buy into the plan that they've come up with.
And you were on the Jake and Stacy show. You appear on there. I don't know if you heard this or saw a sound of it last week, but I think it was last Thursday or Friday. Jake Heaps talked about sources that he had gone through with the Desai. And I thought it was really interesting. It didn't get a lot of attention. And Desai wanted a lot of assurances to come. So some of the reservations that we've had about some of Pete, it seems like Desai had them too. And that might have been the holdup in him coming in the first place, because they seem to be linked to him for quite a while. So it sounded like that he wanted control in terms of like scheme and how the defense is going to be directed, but he also wanted control of personnel decisions. He wanted to have impact, and so he needed strong assurances. And Jake, if you anyone of the listeners haven't heard that, give that a listen. It's really interesting because in the past, a lot of those things have not happened. We saw like Ken Norton Jr. just seemed like essentially a Pete Carroll yes man, and we don't know what KJ Wright talked about how all that they're connected at the hip. This seems a little different. So I did find that promising. I found it really interesting as we head towards the acquisition phase of this team.
And is it misplaced hope, belief, faith on my behalf, Jeff, that maybe this is a sign that Pete Carroll is willing to do what I think a lot of us have wanted him to do for some time, which is I think Pete Carroll is a terrific motivator. I think he is a good head coach. I don't think he's a bad head coach. I think that the Seahawks could have used a fresh start. I think he's a good head coach, but I really wanted to see him become a figurehead and allow other people to run things. And I'd love to think that the switch away from Mike Solari and Shane Waldron and Andy Dickerson now having full control over the offensive line and the blocking schemes, and the turn towards Clint Hurt and Sean Desai, and with Carl Scott coming in, that maybe, just maybe, this is a sign that Carroll is, if not willing to take a complete Nick Saban step back, that maybe he is willing to cede a little bit of control to some of these guys that he's employed.
Yeah, I would hope so because you've made the comparison to Nick Saban a lot, and I agree with that a lot. I don't think Pete's. I said earlier. I don't think Pete's hired good enough coaches on his staff, and I think there are signs that he's looking outside the box. He's thinking a little differently. I just need to see what happens if they hit adversity, because that's where Pete gets a little nervous and he starts leaning back on things he's comfortable with. We saw it a couple of years ago when they changed their offense a little bit. They started off really hot, and then Russell started turning the ball over. Then Pete went back to what he was comfortable with. So we need to see a little more. I think the most telling part is how they address this offseason. I think that's going to be a real sign. Either they can see what's happening with this team, or if they're going to do the same thing as they've done before, it's going to be really hard to get excited about what their direction.
We are going to get on to free agency. So if anybody's wondering, we will. Yeah. Oh, yes, we are going to talk about some names. Don't worry about that. Big Mike's got in touch with a super chat. Big Mike, thank you. Big support of the channel. Thank you for that. If anybody else wants to jump in, please do. I mean, I like the idea of a more aggressive. I don't know if you've seen some of the quotes from Clint Hurt. I like the idea of a more aggressive, attack-minded defense.
Sure.
Which goes, against kind of. I think we can safely say that you would not call Carroll's defense an attack-minded, aggressive defense. It's all been about execution, hasn't it? Really, first and foremost, doing your job. So I'm keen to see what this is going to look like. It's going to be interesting. And from the offensive side of things, Andy Dickerson and Shane Waldron taking over. I really like this move, not because I have any. I know some fans have been saying, "Well, Mike Solari wasn't any good" and anything like this. I'm not of that mindset at all. I had no real issue with Solari. I think what the tools he was given, fair enough, whatever. But I don't like to do anything by half, and I don't want that to be muddled, Jeff. And the fact that they're now saying to Shane Waldron and Andy Dickerson, "You're leading the way on this now," I like that, and I think it's their responsibility now. I wonder if it's going to mean any changes either to the kind of personnel, because they've got a couple of holes they need to fill at center and tackle. I don't see them moving on from Lewis and Gabe Jackson, and their body types are very much Mike Solari types, but who knows what they're going to do. But I think this could be quite interesting to see the kinds of players they target or re-sign or whatever at center, at right tackle, now that they've made this change.
Yeah, and you mentioned the first thing I thought of when I saw this move, because one of the weird parts about the Waldron hire was they kept Solari on staff last year. And Solari, when he replaced Tom Cable, he brought in physically bigger, stronger offensive linemen. You do a great job diving into the draft stuff. And they've just looked at different kinds of players since Solari got there. They drafted different. One of the first signings they made when Solari came was DJ Fluker, who there's no chance that Tom Cable would have had playing guard. So now they're going back to when they hired Waldron. That's a zone-based run scheme. A lot of their commotion comes from zone offense. And then you had this offensive line coach that didn't fit that. So one of their first moves last year was Gabe Jackson, who's not typically built the way, say, the Rams guards are. So now you have Damian Lewis switched positions last year. He didn't look as good as left guard. And I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see if they decide to keep both those guys. Like they can walk away from Gabe Jackson, I think clear $3 million. I think that's going to be a consideration right now because they're looking at different body types on the Rams, and they're looking at more agile zone running offensive linemen. I don't know if Lewis and Jackson fit that mold. So I think it was smart. I think they just had to be philosophically aligned. I think that's the way I would put it, where they had to have the offense run through the offensive lineman makes sense. So I think they're leaning more into Shane Waldron, and hopefully we see more of what we saw at the end of the year because Waldron went through a pretty big learning curve last year. But it's good to give him the keys to make it successful because this is a big year for so many people in this organization.
Yeah, and look, I can fully buy into trying to copy the Rams on their O line in any way because they were ranked number one in, I think it was pass blocking percent win rate or something like that per ESPN. And if you look at most of the the analytics and stuff, the Rams, if they're not first in these categories, they're in the top 10 for most of them. And this is, in fairness, without plowing loads and loads of resource into their O line. It's not like they've done what the Chiefs did a year ago and just go and
Exactly.
sign a lot of guys. It's we'll take a 40-year-old left tackle, we'll pluck Corbett from the Browns, who was a draft bust for them. We fifth round pick at center. We've got a 6th round pick at left guard, who was a converted tackle. We've got Rob Havenstein, who was just a big lump, I thought, when he was coming out of the league. He's actually had a decent career, much better than I expected. But he, if they can create that again, and Waldron and Dickerson have been there, then all power to them. I think it's a good plan, and I can believe in it. Okay, so before we get into the whole free agency thing, I think that the one question has to be answered because the Seahawks admittedly have some cap space, but I don't think they have enough really to do everything that they need to do. And Carroll's kind of touched on this when he said that cap money will go very quickly when they start to retain players. And I think there's a weird contradiction between Carroll saying those words, which he did say in fairness before the Jody Allen meeting. So things might have changed after that meeting. But if Sean Desai has been given reassurances, as Jake Heaps was suggesting, that they are going to go and sign certain players and build a defense to convince him to come, I think they're going to need more. And there is one great big elephant in the room, and it's Bobby Wagner's contract. What are they going to do, Jeff? What are they going to do with Bobby Wagner?
I think they're going to try to reduce his contract and keep him. If I was them, I would advocate that I think they need to get rid of him. And I think watching this playoffs, it was so clear to me what wins in this league. And it's trench play, it's pass rush, it's offensive line. You watch almost every single game. And I was talking about this on our show just throughout the playoffs. You watch every single game in this playoffs, and it's blue chip players on defense taking over games. And they're almost, you look at the players that win on these playoff games and the guys that are changing these playoff games, they're called game wreckers. You saw it with Donald and Miller. Those guys are hard to get. They're unicorns. But even like Tennessee should have beat the Bengals because Jeffrey Simmons, for better or worse, that's my name. But Jeffrey Simmons dominated that game. And you look at the game the Packers lost to Green Bay, to the 49ers. It was Bosa, Armstead, DJ Jones. Those guys just completely blew up that Green Bay line. And you look throughout the league, and to put 18 million or 16 million in Bobby Wagner, it just reaffirmed to me that it turned out to be a big mistake. And you can see why the Seahawks just aren't getting value out of their blue chip players on defense right now are Bobby Wagner and Jamal Adams. And Jamal Adams has been injured both years. He hasn't been very effective in terms of what he thought he would do. And Bobby's a good linebacker, but you look at the teams and like, can you name a lot of linebackers on the Rams or Bengals? I know the Bengals got a great, like having Jordan Brooks is perfectly fine. You can fill in Cody Barton. You can fill those spots in. You need to reinvest your money into those blue chip defensive linemen. And frankly, you saw it at every playoff game, and it reaffirmed me. Even the Raiders, who were pretty close to being they had Max Crosby. They had a great game from him. So you look across the league, and the Chiefs had some good ones. If you don't have blue chip players on the defensive line, it's hard to think you're going to have a chance to have success in the playoffs. And to put your money in Bobby Wagner especially at this point of his career, it's just bad spending.
I have a hard time trying to work out what Bobby Wagner is actually worth, because it's quite challenging to look at that, because I've seen people throw around figures. Some say like 12 million would be fine, and I'm sure somebody else might say 8 or something like this. But it's hard to sort of work out a figure that Wagner would be comfortable with, because if you are going to lower his salary and keep him, that means probably an extension. And that means that he is committing to a certain dollar amount for 2023 and or 2024. And he may think the best thing for me is to go and be a free agent and see if I can talk to all 32 teams, and I might get more money from other people. So he might say, look, if you're going to try this, just release me and I'll see what's out there and I'll come back. And I actually hope that they do that, because, you know, I don't really want to see. I think it's time to move on. And I'm going to sort of show you a couple of clips in a second of the player that I want, Jeff, and
Sure.
and the style of play that I want at linebacker. Because with respect to Bobby, I think he's become hesitant. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's just because he's at this stage of his career and maybe he's playing through pain. I don't know what it is, but I think he's become very hesitant as a player. And I'm hearing Clint Hurtt saying aggressive defense, and I want aggressive front seven, attacking opponents, getting after them. If they're going to blitz, I don't want just to have designated blitzer Jamal Adams. I want other guys who can do it as well. And I want them to go to Bobby Wagner and say, we respect the heck out of you, but we're not going to pay you $20 million this year. Go away and find out what your market is and then come back to us, which is what they did with Richard Sherman.
Yeah.
And then I hope that they have the ability, if he gets decent money elsewhere, to say, good luck in your new team. And the reason is, and look, have a look at this, Jeff. I don't know if you've studied this player or not. I know that you pay a lot of attention to the draft, but I want aggression at linebacker. And when I watch Channing Tindall play for Georgia, now people have to remember they have 3 linebackers at Georgia and they rotate them. It's the weirdest thing in the world. It's like they have like instead of a pass rush rotation, they have like a linebacker rotation. And that puts me off a little bit, because you kind of think, why is Tindall the one who starts the game on the bench and then comes on? But then I see stuff like this and I think, this is an aggressive front seven.
Right in now at running back. He's off to a good start this season.
So that's the first play there. He is engaged an offensive lineman. The offensive lineman ends up on his backside, and then he goes and completes the play. You know, he's straight in there. He's getting after.
Move into the top 5. They're a legitimate team. The carry on Joyner, step down.
So anytime a helmet comes off, I've saved that clip. I've just got.
At least he doesn't get trapped behind the line.
And against a good defense, it's a bit overwhelming for him.
Off the play action, backpedals, delivers underneath, but they are all
Nothing at all, so it allows these linebackers and the safeties to let them hit these little dinks and dunks and then just rally. Let them make the catch.
tonight. Now,
okay, the best clip that I've got is not amongst that group, and I'm really disappointed that I've not managed to get it in this little system that they've got here on StreamYard. But look, the first play is the one more than anything else. It's just, and you see this with Tyndall, he is willing to take somebody on and get after it, and he flies to the ball, and it just puts pressure on opponents because there's no easy sort of out there, you know. And when I watch the Seahawks defend screens in 2021, I'm thinking, I need somebody who's going to one spot a screen and then is just going to go head down straight to the ball carrier. He's going to get through traffic with speed, and he's going to dump someone on his backside. Jeff, the Seahawks don't do that, and I want a linebacker who can.
Yeah, I think just studying the league and studying what works, and I think the teams that are doing it right at linebacker, I think you want speed, you want aggressiveness. I think we see linebackers coming out of the draft, and you do great work on the draft diving into this, but we see a lot of instant impact because it's not a position that there's a ton of learning curve. We see a lot of instant impact, young, fast guys. Like you remember what KJ Wright was when he started, and Bobby was pretty good right out of the gate. Those guys are really good linebackers, but I think the way you want to invest your resources into a team, I think you want to have linebackers on rookie contracts, guys who have fresh legs, they're fast, they're aggressive, and then you invest your money in the trenches and maybe players who can cover. And you look at, if you watch the Super Bowl, this guy wouldn't have won MVP, but Logan Wilson might have been the Bengals' best player. And he's a second or third year linebacker. He's young, he's fresh. You can get him. He was drafted in the third round. That's the kind of guy you want to. That's where you want to position your linebackers. Jordan Brooks, they drafted him probably higher than I would have been comfortable. Probably would not have spent a first round pick on a outside backer, but he fits that mold where he's fast, he's young, he's ready to take a jump this year. We've seen flashes, but if you compare him with a guy like Tyndall, that makes a lot of sense. And take Bobby's 18 million, reinvest it. That's just good economics. And Tyndall's a great fit for what the Seahawks want to do and what you want out of your linebacker. I think Logan Wilson, just seeing what he did to the Rams run game, that's probably not what Bobby is at this point of his career. And Bobby probably, if you're him, you probably want to hit free agency and pick your team at this point. So I think it's a good thing for both sides. And I think it's a great thing where you want to get, like, Cody Barton looked okay at the end of last year when he was playing middle. He hasn't looked great on the outside, but I think if you can upgrade that spot with one of those, maybe a third round pick, maybe a second round pick, I think that makes the defense a lot better if you can spend Bobby's money wisely.
I think Logan Wilson's a great shout and a great name to bring up. Loved him going into the draft, and these guys are available in round 3. He ran like a 4.2 short shuttle. These are the kind of guys you've got to look for. 4.6 40, if it was 4.63 or something like that. He's got speed. I would think that Tyndall's potentially going to go a bit earlier than he did. I think he went pick 665-ish, which is kind of about the range where the Seahawks are going to end up picking in round 3. But you can get guys like that. And I put a little horizontal board. It's not a little horizontal board. It took forever, but it's a board where there's like a lot of linebackers in that range. And I'm thinking, go and get one of those. Go and get a fast, aggressive linebacker and save some money, and then spend that $20 million either on your O-line or on your D-line. And if they start to do that, there's no reason why this team cannot take a big step forward this year. Right, free agents. It seems like the week, Jeff, where every major website that writes about the NFL has decided that they've got to get one of their reporters to write a top 100 or top 200 free agents list. So there's lots to choose from. I've picked this one. I've not had a chance to read through all of PFF's because there's 200 names on it. But I have had a look at Shield Kapadia's on The Athletic. And I wrote down some names that I like. And I want to ask you whether you are interested in them, what you think about these guys. And let's have a conversation about some of them. And, some of them have been pretty obvious that you would want them. And I think others, maybe it's a question mark. So number 6 overall on this list that Shield Kapadia has put together, top 75 names. And please do check it out, people, if you've got a subscription to The Athletic. He's got Chandler Jones there. He mentions that he's played 15 games in 5 of the last 6 years. And he suggests a salary in a similar range to Shaquille Barrett's $17 million a year. I had a look on a big piece I wrote over the weekend, and people like Leonard Floyd, for example, and Robert Quinn have signed big contracts in that range, but with low year 1 cap hits of about 6 or 7 million. So I love the idea of signing Chandler Jones. If you sign him, Jeff, and he misses the whole season through injured reserve, I will curse all luck, but I will not criticize the Seahawks. I want to see a stud pass rusher that other teams fear playing. I think Chandler Jones is that. Would you be interested in him for that kind of money?
Oh, absolutely. I've been earmarking Chandler Jones since the middle of last year, once the Seahawks season sort of hit the road. I said if this was a year where they're going to keep Russell, I didn't know if they'd keep the coaches, but if they're going to keep Russell, I thought Chandler Jones was the guy they had to target. And I think watching this playoffs, it's just become so much more clear to me that the Seahawks they don't have a top 10 pick. They traded that away. They don't have that number 1A pass rusher. And you look again, I mentioned before, what wins in the playoffs? It's those blue chip type A players. And Chandler Jones, not only do you take him from a division rival who's tormented you over the years, I think he's sacked Russell more than any other player in the NFL. I think what he can do for a Darrell Taylor and a Dunlap, that gives you a real 3-headed monster, maybe the best pass rushing group in the division. So I think Chandler Jones would be worth every dollar. And I said before, that's exactly where you can take Bobby's. You can structure it where you can have a year 1 cap hit, or if you need to blow it up in year 1, removing Bobby and just reallocating that money to Chandler Jones. I think that makes your team a lot better. And Chandler Jones' his speed off the edge, what he can do for other players, I think that's a no-brainer. I think it's going to be, for me, really hard to get excited from the Seahawks standpoint if they can't buy one of these top-tier pass rushers, because they're going to have to be good in so many other spots for them to actually get back into this championship level team. So if I'm the Seahawks, and I know him and Russell are friendly, they get along, he's the number 1 guy I'm targeting. I think he's a good age. I think he's fits their championship window with Russell. I think Russell's got 2 years left. I think that fits really, really well. And what he can do for other players, I think he's the guy for me. He's the guy I'm targeting in free agency.
I mean, a quick digression from the list, because I think you raise it. What is the point of keeping Russell Wilson and having another free agency like the last 2 or 3 years? What is the point, Jeff? There's no point, is there? Because it's just going to create further drama. Because he will acknowledge that they're still not doing enough to put themselves in contention. You waste potentially another year. The plan hasn't worked. You've ended up 7-10. Your division rival has won the Super Bowl by being the complete opposite in terms of aggression, in terms of being aggressive. What is the point? If they go into this free agency period and it's just, we'll wait till week 2 and see what's left, and we'll get a couple of journeymen in here and the 2022 version of Benson Mayowa, then what's the point of the Seahawks, really? And you might as well just trade Russell Wilson, and you might as well trade a couple of others as well, and embrace a massive rebuild. Because if you want to do things that way, then you might as well blow it up and see if you can hit on Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase over the next 5 years. Because there's no point persevering with this plan unless with Russell Wilson. So I hope that they are aggressive, but do you think they will be?
I'm cautiously optimistic. And I think the one thing that I'm very curious is if Pete and John sort of see the writing on the wall, because they had that meeting with Jody. Everyone tried to make it out like it was nothing. This is the first time they've been on the hot seat. They're league-wide. Pete Carroll is known on the hot seat. That's never happened at any other time. Maybe his second year here where they were 7-9, 7-9, and you might have wondered if he knew what he was doing. But I got to think that they're looking at this and seeing Russell's contract, seeing their situation and saying, okay, Tom Brady might be leaving the conference. He's supposedly retired. Aaron Rodgers might be leaving the conference, but who knows with that. They have a window now. The Rams are going to have to probably lose some guys. They got a window. They might have the best quarterback in the conference if Rodgers leaves. Pete's 70 years old. John Schneider, who knows how long he'll be here. If they have another bad year, I think both those guys are fired. So I'm hoping that they're looking at this saying, okay, we need to go for it. This is our last chance here. If not, I'd rather them trade Russell too. I don't see the point of being setting up to be a 10-win team like they've been the last few years. And it's just so obvious. And they've talked about pass rush. One of the interesting things I've found about Clint Hurt is he was on Mike Dugar's podcast last year, and there were some swipes at their approach in free agency, especially with the defensive line group, which is funny because we've talked about this for like 2 years. He was not happy. He was pretty pissed. So he lost Clowney and he lost Frank Clark, all these guys he spent time developing. And he's like, and then you leave me and I got Benson and Bruce as my pass rushers. And he was pissed. And today in the interview today, he took some swipes. We need our guys moving forward. We're going to play aggressive. We're not just going to zone the whole time. So I think if Clint has personnel power and Desai has personnel power, I'm very cautiously optimistic. But man, we've seen so many years where like we are not a day one team and we're going to wait for the value. If you do that, you're just setting yourself up for failure, and you're going to be that first round fodder team you've been for so long.
Yeah, Clint Hurt is a breath of fresh air, in fairness, and I listened to those comments and today, saying what we needed to hear. I really hope that he succeeds, and I hope that they have. I just do one of two things: either be really aggressive or trade Russell Wilson. Don't go in between.
Agreed.
And
yep.
if you get into the market and you just find that no one wants to come and it's not working out for you, then I would seriously start answering some of those calls and just embracing the other plan, because just doing the same thing is just wasting everybody's time. It just feels like we're all aging and getting older, and the Seahawks still aren't doing it. They're getting worse and worse every year. Right, let's get back to the list. Paul has got in touch though first with a super chat. Paul, many thanks for your support. Keep those super chats coming in today. Right, the next name on the list is Von Miller, who is at number 11. And Miller is, he's going to be 33. He's already made it very clear that he's going to carry on playing, unlike, Aaron Donald and Sean McVay, who've been sort of dangling the idea of not continuing. Von Miller said before the Super Bowl, I'm carrying on. I'm going to test free agency. I'm going to go for it. I suspect that the Rams will, having spent a second and a third round pick on him, will do everything to keep him, and that he will have interest in playing for the Rams again after what has happened. But Kapadia suggested a deal similar to JJ Watt's 2-year, $28 million contract. The Cardinals structured that deal, Jeff, with $5 million on the cap this year in 2021, and then next year it's $16 million, which is an interesting way of doing it, because that would work for Seattle to get Miller in the building, but then you're stuck with him for $16 million when he's a year older and he's going to be 34. So what do you reckon? If Chandler Jones ends up somewhere else, what about Von Miller?
Yeah, if Jones is 1A, Miller's 1B. And Miller, there were some concerns that he was starting to fade a little bit. He's been hurt. But once he got healthy this year and he was in the Rams, he was a dominant player. And that Tampa Bay playoff game, he was the best player in the field. And if you watch some of his rushes in the Super Bowl, like it's not a great offensive line, he looked phenomenal. And I know, and he's a guy, again, who really fits their window. Because from a Seahawks perspective, I think it's going to be really hard to get him to leave LA. Playing beside Aaron Donald as a pass rusher is as good as it gets. But from the Seahawks perspective, him and Russell are pretty close. They've worked out together. They have a good relationship. But if you're bringing in the Vic Fangio defense, and this is where there was some thought that Ed Donatel could have been a good selling for here, but Miller's coming from Denver, where Vic Fangio was the coach for the last couple of years, and we know he can perform in that scheme. So I don't know if Desai has a history with him or they haven't really crossed paths together, but just from a pure schematic standpoint, Miller makes a ton of sense if you're moving to that Vic Fangio defense where he's been good, he knows it, there's not going to be much turnover. And again, the speed he brings off the edge and the experience, he's really good with his hands and he's a really good just professional pass rusher. He would be really good to have with Taylor coming off the other side where he's just like pure athleticism, pure raw like skill, and Dunlap. Those three would work really well together. So I think Chandler Jones just would be 1A, but Miller, if that they ended up with Miller and no Chandler Jones, I wouldn't bat an eye. That I think they need to go after these guys. And I think Russell's going to need to be in the recruiting because people might be hesitant to come not knowing if he's going to be around. So I think for the Seahawks, for me to get really excited about this team again, I think they have to land one of those two players.
A lot was made of Adrian Peterson's impact on Rashad Penny. Maybe a bit too much, actually. But
Probably.
But Penny was constantly sort of asked about it. And, I just can't help but think, what a great mentor for Darrell Taylor if Von Miller came in. That's the kind of player that Taylor could end up being. With the potential that he's shown, why not learn from the master for a couple of years? And I think it would be a great fit. I think you made some great points there. The other sort of pass rush, I wrote down a long list. I'm not going to go through everybody, but Harold Landry. Chuck Capati is saying that since 2019, Landry has played more snaps than any other edge defender or defensive lineman in the NFL, and he's tallied 26 and a half sacks. He's a good age. He's 26. I kind of wonder whether he's going to be this year's Trey Hendrickson as a player that maybe after the first couple of big names go, could he be? Because the Cincinnati Bengals were going after somebody else. I can't remember who it was last year, but they'd sort of targeted a different pass rusher, missed out on him, and then pivoted to Trey Hendrickson. And I wonder if, and it may even be the Seahawks who do this, somebody goes for a Chandler Jones or a Von Miller, and if they don't get him, they immediately turn their attentions to Harold Landry. He may end up being a bit more expensive because of his age. Capadia was reckoning $16 million a year as an estimate. What do you think of him?
So you're talking to the right person on Harold Landry. And I Googled this the other day when I was just talking to a buddy who's a Titans fan. My mock draft in 2018, before the Seahawks traded down, which they eventually used to draft Penny, I gave them Harold Landry. He was a guy I thought was perfect for the Leo position. At the time, I thought him and Frank Clark would have been the perfect combination because of Clark's physical size, and they needed some speed off the edge. Landry ended up going in the second round. He hadn't done much, and then the last year and a half, he really turned up in spite. I see a lot of similarities between him and Cliff Averill in terms of just like the development in their career, the way they play. A lot of just in terms of the size is pretty similar. Landry's not the number one type A guy that you're getting with a Von Miller or Chandler Jones. But I think Landry's a great backup plan because I think he's the right age. He's 26 years old. You're getting him first prime of his career. I think his speed would be really valuable at that Leo spot where Dunlap's been playing, and you can kind of manage those two together and the way they complement each other. So again, I've been earmarking Landry since the draft. He was a guy I really liked coming out of Boston College, and I gave him to the Seahawks. So years later, it'd be pretty refreshing to see that come back. But I think he's the right age, and he would make sense if you can't get one of those top two.
He's the kind of guy that you can imagine doing well. On his second contract, you could get 4 or 5 years out of him that is really useful. When you actually look at his combine and look, there are some really appealing things. 4.6 speed at 250 odd pounds, 4.19 short shuttle. His 10-yard split is a 1.59. Anything in that the 1.5s is really good. 6.883 cone. He's explosive, 36-inch vertical. He's got all of the sort of the physical numbers that you look for in a really good NFL pass rusher. So I think that would be a terrific investment. I could imagine. Look, I'd have if somebody turned around and said, I'd rather have Howard Landry than Chandler Jones or Von Miller, I'd go, yeah, fine, because of the age, because maybe you get a bit more out of it. He's been able to stay healthy for a number of years now. I think durability was a slight issue with him coming out. I don't know if there was some kind of injury issue in the draft or something. I remember there was something about that.
There was an injury, yeah.
But he's been able to stay on the field. And I just, who thought when the Bengals signed Trey Hendrickson that would be a major piece towards a Super Bowl run the very next year? And you kind of just wonder whether he could be that for Seattle. Devontae's got in touch. Honest takes guy sticking with Carson, or do we need a new running back? Penny is not an option. Let's just answer that very quickly then, Jeff. What do you reckon? Do they stick with Carson? And well, look, who are the top two running backs for Seattle if you were making the call next year?
I would
feel free to just say draft pick rather than any particular name if you want to.
I think it would be very foolish to keep Chris Carson on the roster. I think given the status of his body and how many injuries he's taken and his inability to stay healthy, I think committing to him again is just a foolish mistake. I would walk away from him. I think his body it's just, I've always thought he plays so physical, he's not going to last very long. And I think we started to see it this year, and you just can't count on him. So I would walk away from Carson. I would try to sign Penny. I thought something clicked in that offense. As long as the deal doesn't become too prohibitive, it's not too long term. If it's say $6 million or under, I'd be okay with that. And if the price gets too high, I would go in the draft. I would not rely on Carson as your number one running back. I think that would be a foolish mistake.
I think I'm just trying to find the article now, because $6 million is a good example of what he can probably expect, because there are running backs that whether you could make a comparison to. Some of these guys have obviously done a lot more than Penny has done over a number of years. But here we go. So Austin Eckler, Nyheim Hines, and Kareem Hunt all earn $6 million a year.
Yeah.
So $6 million for me, I'd happily spend that to see if what happened last year could be replicated over 17 games. And I think if you do it on a 1-year deal, you say to Penny, look, it was working for you here. Come back and do that for a full season. And then you re-enter the market in a year and you could get a lot more than $6 million a year. I think it works for everybody. So I'd happily do that deal. Right, back to the free agents. Brian Allen, who is the center for the Rams. We've talked a bit about, if you're going to mimic the Rams, why not steal their center? The Seahawks need a center. He graded very, very well, Brian Allen, in terms of PFF. And he's 26 years old again. So he's a good age. He's a bit of a 1-year wonder, though, Jeff. And he's smaller than the Seahawks have often gone for at center. Have you got any thoughts on pinching a player from the Rams?
I think it would make sense, just in terms of the center position has been driving me personally nuts. And not only just the players they've trotted out, they've just misevaluated. I don't know how they could have come up with Kyle Fuller as a legitimate starting center option. He reminded me of when they tried that guy in 2015. I can't remember, Drew Nowak. It reminded me of that, where they lost games last year because they had Kyle Fuller at center. So the last years I've been like scouring the draft, scouring the free agent market, and year after year, they just keep either like trying to outthink the room with BJ Finney or thinking Ethan Posick, and Ethan Posick's fine. He's a middle of the road guy. But to me, I think this would just make so much sense. You stabilize the middle of your line. He can play. He played against Vita Vea and those guys in the playoffs. He played against the Niners. I'd be a little worried to give him big money because he's coming off the 1-year wonder. Some of those Rams offensive linemen haven't been great when they've left. Like Austin Blythe went somewhere else. We were looking at him last year, and he sort of fizzled out of the league. He was like a backup on the Chiefs this year. But it would just make so much sense. The Creed Humphrey thing drove us all crazy last year because I had him going in the first round in the mocks. I couldn't believe he was still on the board when they picked, and it sounds like they didn't even consider him. So they could have had this thing settled, but Allen would just make so much sense. It really sets in motion the promotion of Dickerson. They have a guy they've worked with. They know they can really stabilize a spot that's really, since Max Unger left, they've been a punching bag. And to block these defensive lines, you need stability in the middle, and right now it's just not there.
One of the guys I'd not really thought about, which was on Shield Kapadia's list, was Ben Jones, and he's been active for 160 of 100, a possible 161 games since entering the league. His PFF grade over the last 2 years, 77.8, 78.6. So he's the center at Tennessee, and he is, he's shown that he's performing at a high level, at least according to PFF, and he's been durable. So I wonder if he's an alternative option. He was at number 58 on Shield's list, which is considerably lower than the 28 that Brian Allen is in, and maybe it could be a slightly cheaper option. So I want to mention, one, two, three, four more guys very quickly.
Sure.
Akeem Hicks, I mean, he's missed 20 games in 3 seasons, but he has got that relationship with Sean Desai, and the Seahawks have needed somebody like him. I just wonder whether or not the injuries and the age might be an issue there, Jeff. Unless you could get him really cheap, which I doubt, then what do you think?
I would love to see them add somewhere in the middle, but I think the injuries and his body starting to wear down would worry me. I think you're buying him at a bad time. But his history with some of these Bears coaches, he's probably played for Clint Hurt before, so that would be another appealing aspect. And they really do. He would be a great guy to pair with Poona Ford, just in terms of the size, in terms of what he can do to blow up the play. But I think there's some other defensive tackles, both in the draft and in free agency, that might make a little more sense at a different price point. But again, if they go out and they get an edge rusher and Akeem Hicks, I think they need to add both. I think either in the draft or free agency, they need another interior guy, and they need like a top tier edge guy. So Hicks is a guy that a lot of people are gonna mimic to Seattle just because of all the Bears ties on their staff now, and that would make some sense. So if they signed Akeem Hicks, I would have no problem with it, but it's definitely a little buyer beware. He plays a very tough position. He's been physically wearing down.
The other defensive tackle and free agency, though, I was going to ask you about before I got into a couple of right tackles, was Calais Campbell. Now, he's very old now, but I've got to tell you, he was part of the broadcast of the UK broadcast of the Super Bowl. I don't know why, but he was. And Kirk Cousins was involved, and Warren Moon. It was a very eclectic mix. And Calais Campbell spent the whole game just basically giving these huge emotional, passionate rants about how desperate he is to get back to the Super Bowl, how he is not even considering retirement, how he wanted to basically get out on the field right there and then and play in that game. He swore as well during his broadcast, which was hilarious. And the presenter had to apologize, even though it was 2:00 in the morning, which felt a bit unnecessary. But it's after the watershed. But I just came away from that thinking, I want this guy. His infectious passion and desire. And when they was breaking down any plays, he was always sort of looking for sort of the violence within those plays. And I just thought he brings a level of toughness that the Seahawks have maybe been lacking in their defense for a long time. And although he is getting up in age, his PFF grade is in the 80s for his 2021 season. So it's not as if his plays dramatically dropped off. Even if he just sort of plays early downs, keeps your linebackers clean, Jeff, is a great influence in the locker room. I'd happily have a bit of Calais Campbell this year. But what do you think?
Oh, man, you're talking my language right now. Harold Landry, Calais Campbell might be my favorite defensive player in the NFL. He was a guy I was really upset when he got traded to Baltimore for like a 5th-round pick. I thought that was a guy that the Seahawks should have given a 3rd-round pick to get. He's been so productive everywhere he's been. Jacksonville, Baltimore. He was great in Arizona. And there's just something about his personality. He's a dominant force. He's a leader. He's a type A personality. He just changes the whole dynamic of the team. And he really made a big difference in changing that culture of that Arizona team. And I was asked on our show a couple weeks ago, way before the Super Bowl, who would be your ideal free agency? I said Chandler Jones and Calais Campbell. Those guys are older, but I just think they would change. And I think Seahawks lack a little size as a defensive tackle, as a rusher. I think what he can do, he's so intense, he's so smart, and he's still a very, very good player. And I think that can limit his price. I think you can get him on a 1 or 2 year deal. And I know the staff has been infatuated with him for years. When they drafted Malik McDowell, that was the year Campbell was a free agent and went to Jacksonville. And they knew they were going to be priced out on that because they still were paying all those Legion of Boom players. But a big part of the reason they wanted to draft Malik McDowell was they wanted their version of Calais Campbell. So they've been fascinated with him for years. and I would still take. I would have him over Akeem Hicks, even though he's a little older, all day. He would be one of my top free agents on my list.
Yeah, I agree. And look, people are referencing the Jamal Adams Louis Vuitton coffee cup in the comment section. It is a direct reference to Calais Campbell. And look, I think that's it. I think the mentality and the identity of the team has to be more Calais Campbell and less Louis Vuitton coffee cup next year. That is, and it's strange you referenced the trade to Baltimore. I think that is the moment that I realized that the Seahawks were not on the path that I was hoping they were going to be on a couple of years ago. That was right before we had a lockdown in this country. And I can remember exactly where I was when I found out when that trade was happening. And I was in the passenger seat of a car. We were going to go into this light show with the kids. And free agency was just about to start. This was kind of like a trade that happened like two days before the league year began. Saw that the Ravens were trading for Calais Campbell. Immediately was absolutely devastated because we'd been talking about this on the blog. And then when I found out it was like a 5th round pick, it was like, are you kidding me? You couldn't have offered like a 4 and a 6.
They had a bunch of draft picks that year, I think, too.
Yeah, I mean, do what it takes to get the man in. And then I'm thinking, well, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they've got some other kind of plan, and they had no other plan.
They paid Jaron Reed too much money, who they cut a year later.
Yeah. Oh my word, and it cost them. Yeah. Quickly, right tackle. Right, the two names. It's not an amazing class of free agents for right tackles, but Trent Brown, I didn't know he'd only played 14 games in the last 2 seasons, which is a bit scary. That's 7 games a season. But actually, when he's started, he's graded very, very well. And, there aren't many tackles that have performed as well as he has when he actually is playing. It's just the health. I wondered whether or not some sort of I think he played for the Patriots for $7 million this year. I was wondering if it was in that kind of range again, whether he would be an option. And then there's Morgan Moses, who again has played pretty well, having been traded to the Jets. He's been good for a long time. He has played a lot of games, unlike Trent Brown. I don't think he's missed a game in something like ridiculous, like 6-7 years. And he's been projected by Shield as a $7 to $8 million contract as well. Do either of those names do anything for you, Jeff, as a right tackle?
I think Trent Brown is really interesting because when they're coming from the Rams have had the way they've done their offensive line is they've had really big guys on the tackle. They have like hulking left and right tackles, and then they have a quicker interior line. And the way the Seahawks would be set up, if you have Dwayne Brown at left tackle and Trent Brown at right tackle, the ages sort of fit again with this 2-year window I keep talking about. That's sort of where this team is. They sort of had this 2-year window to win, and then who the hell knows from there? Pete might be gone, Russell might be gone. The whole thing was going to look a lot different. So an older veteran player that fits that window, to me, makes a lot of sense. And you have Jake Curran. He can sort of fill in he minimizes the injury risk because Curran, he's a gritty player. He was fine in a pinch. I think if he played over a full season, we'd see some of his physical limitations show up. But I don't know about Morgan Moses. I don't think I'd want to pay big money for like a middle of the road guy. But when Trent Brown plays, he's a really impactful player. He's been really good in New England, and he's played left tackle. So if Dwayne Brown's there and he gets hurt, you can flip him over to left tackle. I would be really into the idea. I think the one thing I would wonder is he's mostly played with like pocket. I wonder how he would do with Russell. Russell might drive him a little crazy based on how he moves, and he's a big guy who like doesn't move as well as other guys. He's just more of a monster right tackle. He's played in with the Raiders, but he played in that Tom Cable scheme, so he can play in the scheme where it's just I would take the chance because you have Jake Curran sitting there who can fill in. He was fine in the run game. He's not a guy I'd want starting, but I think that sort of fits.
And there is the end of the list of players the Seahawks will not sign this offseason. We're going to move on to the Russell Wilson section of the live stream now. So strap yourselves in. Jeff, what is your view of the lay of the land on Wilson's future? Because I when I have a look on the internet now, it feels like there's about 5 fan bases who are furiously debating the prospect of training for Russell Wilson. The Seahawks message has been pretty consistent, and Wilson's has been, although Wilson's, I think he's very much in the trying not to say anything interesting bracket right now. Where do you see this sitting as we sit here on February the 16th?
Well, yeah, Wilson likes to play both sides. He's like a master politician. He likes to tell people what they hear, and he plays both sides of this. He tells everyone who listens now that he wants to play for the Seahawks. I'm sure his agent wants him to get the hell out of there. So right now, I'm thinking he does stay. And I think the reason for that is one, I think some of his best options kind of got stripped away from him. I thought the Saints would have been a very logical transition for him at this point of his career, but Sean Payton walked away. And it's funny, you mentioned that Sean Payton was the guy Seattle should target. So that actually could become an option next year. If this Pete Carroll thing doesn't turn out, that could become a really interesting conversation. I thought the Giants, based on, I think Russell, just from a football standpoint, sure, it's not great, but they hired an offensive head coach, Brian Dable, who did a great job with Josh Allen. They have high first round picks, which would have appealed to Seattle. And I think Russell, based on how he is, he's a little different than maybe like a Justin Herbert, kind of a quieter guy. I think Russell would, he's big into what his legacy and his brand would be. I think New York, if he can fix the New York Giants, I think that would really fit Russell and Ciara and that whole thing. Them hiring Dable, though, made me think that, and they've been very publicly fond of Daniel Jones. So I think that option is now off the table as well. So if you look at Seattle and you look at, okay, what is an option that can fit them and give them an option? There just really isn't a lot of logical situations. I think Washington is going to make a big run. I really do. Washington, they've had a lot of issues with their franchise because of all the stories that have come out about their ownership. Dan Snyder's constantly in the news. He's now trying to investigate himself. I don't know what's going on there. They're a team that had the second lowest attendance in the NFL last year. Me and Rob were talking about this offline a couple weeks ago. They have one of the biggest, if not the biggest, I think Dallas might be, but they have one of the biggest stadiums in the NFL. So to have one of the biggest stadiums with the second lowest attendance, that's really bad. So I would not be surprised if there's like a MO from there to like, okay, we need to make a splash, like do something. So there's going to be teams that are going to want Denver. For us, if Green Bay doesn't trade Aaron Rodgers, Denver's going to make, they're set up for a push. But again, I just can't come to it because from Seattle's perspective, maybe if they had fired Pete or if John had full personnel control, I know, Rob, you talk about this on your blog a lot. There just isn't an answer to replace him that fits Pete's timeline. So if it was a better draft class, then I think the deal would have happened. I really think you could have got out of this thing and you could have let Russell get a fresh start. You draft someone, you're good. But who are you going to use? Is it going to be Marcus Mariota, Teddy Bridgewater, Mitch Trubisky, Jimmy Garoppolo is in the division. You're not trading for him. So you're just left. Then the draft just doesn't work for Pete's timeline. So I just see it as, I think Russell and his camp have sort of come to that conclusion, which is why they aren't pushing harder on this. Because really, if they wanted to, they can really push. They can either demand a trade or just try to get out of there. But I think they've come to some conclusion that they're largely going to run this thing back. Which, if you told me that 2-3 months ago, I would have been stunned. That if you would have told me Pete, John, and Russell are all going to be back next year, I would have thought you were nuts. But I think based on how the draft is, it's a terrible quarterback class. Rob talks about this a lot. Like, I don't think we can be setting up. This is a really bad quarterback class. Free agency class might be worse. And if Aaron Rodgers comes off the trade market, you might see some aggressive trades, but I just can't see Seattle pulling the trigger on any of them.
I think that you're absolutely correct that Russell Wilson and Mark Rodgers have determined that Carroll's determination to keep Wilson will win out over everything. And that perhaps if Jody Allen, which I think is something that Albert Breer said, has also voiced her preference for Wilson to stay, that actually it doesn't matter what they do. They're probably not going to check. So therefore, what's the point of coming out all guns blazing and saying that you want to leave, you want to trade? Hey, Adam Schefter, these are the teams we're going to go to, if it's not going to make a blind bit of difference. But I think there's also that kind of, the little link every now and again from a certain journalist or something saying Wilson's keeping his options open. He's doing what you said. He's keeping it. He's playing both sides, really. I'm open to a trade. I probably would rather move on, but I don't see a route out of this. So I don't want to be the villain. I don't want to be the guy who is demanding a trade with a graphic on Twitter with a statement. I don't want to be that guy because that's not what my brand, Wilson and Russell Wilson sees himself as a brand, is calling for. So I think he's actually playing both sides. And I think a lot of this, I hope to be here kind of stuff is almost, maybe the team will trade me or whatever. And I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I am curious though, Jeff, what's going to happen because, you mentioned Washington there. And I've never seen a team in any sport make anything so more clear than to go out of their way and to employ Mike Silver to write an article for the team website where he basically says the newly named Washington Commanders, I almost call them the Commodores though, it's because it is a terrible name. they're going to go after, and I can't name them because that'll be tampering because I'm working for the team on this particular article. So I will say the one with the singer for a wife and the guy who plays in Wisconsin, and and he did that. And I just think, look, this is just insane. I think I wrote a few weeks ago, it'd be like Peter King coming out and going, the Seahawks intend to trade for a pass rusher, and on Seahawks.com. I mean, you just don't see those kind of things. And you're right, with the tickets and the reputation and the toxicity of that ownership group and the bad reputation that they have, and everything about the team is just wrong, and you've relaunched and you need a fresh start, and you can't have a fresh start with a crap quarterback and winning 6 games. They need to do something. I'm just so intrigued to see what they're going to do, because right now I'm not sure that they're going to get anywhere near Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. So what does Washington's fresh start look like if that's true? Because good luck selling it as a brave new era with Jimmy G being the quarterback, or Carson
Wentz.
I
was going to say. Yeah, I was going to say, I think Jimmy G ends up there.
And look, I want to come back to that in a second. Darth says, sorry I'm late. What did I miss? Just want to do my part. Support you guys. Darth, thank you very much. Big supporter. What are they going to do? I mean, it's improbable. I think with the Niners, I'll just say it now, by the way, it'll really piss me off if the Seahawks and the Packers hold firm and reject like a bajillion picks and everything. And that means the Niners get a first-round pick for Jimmy Garoppolo. That will really wind me up that they end up getting out of this, with a guy that they don't want anymore, that they've already spent 3 first-round picks to replace him on Trey Lance, and they get one back for an average, middling 30-year-old quarterback. I mean, that would be crazy. But you've essentially got Denver, you've got Tampa Bay, you've maybe got Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh are going to draft Malik Willis, but we'll see. Maybe New Orleans. I mean, they haven't got an option there. And we have this perfect storm, Jeff, that you've mentioned. There's this absolutely honking quarterback class. It's hilariously poor, and was highlighted how poor it was, particularly in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, because most of the big name guys were there, and they all looked pretty bad. And then you've got this Super Bowl with the Rams winning it, having traded for Matt Stafford a year ago, and then getting over the final hurdle, replacing Jared Goff. And there are just going to be a whole bunch of teams that are going to go, we're going to do what the Rams did. We're going to try and make this happen. And it's not a great draft class at the top, so we'll spend our picks. And I just want to know what's going to happen. I want to know what kind of offers are in, because I do think you're right that ultimately the Seahawks will say no. And I think the Packers will say no on Aaron Rodgers, and they will retain Rodgers. But I'd still love to know the kind of offers that are going to come in for these guys, because it could be anything, really, especially from Washington's point of view. I can't imagine that they're going to go, well, we need the brave new era, but we're not willing to go that far for it. I mean, I think they'll basically just say, short of, I think they'd throw in a player and 3 first-round picks, and that player could even be Chase Young. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think from just like an economic perspective, if the Seahawks had maybe a different coach who wasn't 70 years old, who doesn't want to rebuild, and say John Schneider was the only one left, I think they'd absolutely trade him. Because from a pure economic perspective, this is the absolute perfect time to trade him. He didn't play particularly well last year. He's getting older. This is a complete seller's market. You just nailed it. There are so many teams that need quarterbacks. They're looking at Stafford and Brady the year before. Brady dropped into Tampa. They won the Super Bowl. So it's 2 years in a row now that's happened. So you're looking at a team like Denver, or you're looking at a team where you have guys. Indianapolis is a really interesting situation where they have guys who look so stable. Their roster looks so good, but the whole Wentz thing blew up in their face, and now they need someone to basically save their jobs. If they've had new quarterbacks 3 years in a row, so like to put up a bidding war against those 4 teams, and then there's Cleveland. There's all kinds of teams out there. I think the Raiders are an interesting one. I think Russell would love playing in Las Vegas. I think that would fit his brand. He would be like, even though he'd probably ignore how good that division is, I think that's one where if things could get off the ground, I don't know what Josh McDaniels thinks of Derek Carr. I know he's publicly supporting him, but he did that with like Jay Cutler last time. So I think that would be one where Seattle might be interested. I don't know if Derek Carr is their kind of guy, but I think their offers, like you said, I really want to see because I think John Schneider's going to be sitting there like biting his fingers, not being able to take some of these deals. But yeah, I still, even though it makes a ton of sense, it probably would be like your real last chance of selling really high. I think the Seahawks are going to just run the whole thing back. I think the ownership is a great point that you brought up. Albert Breer said a big thing that most sports fans just don't understand or don't factor enough is the impact of ownership. We talked about Dan Snyder, but there's been examples of things in the past with drafting, like Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan. Those guys didn't want to draft and trade for RG3. That came from the ownership level. There's just a lot of that happens in sports where we blame these teams for making these bad picks, when sometimes the owner just tells them you have to pick this guy and they have no choice. So I think the hard thing for Pete and John, who are, I think by all indications, they're on the hot seat. I think for them to get Jody Allen to sign off on a trade would be really hard because she would be worried about ticket sales. I don't know if she's planning on selling the team or she's worried about just maintaining the value of the team. I think it would be really hard for the average fan to accept the Russell Wilson trade. So I think when you factor in all those things, even though the offers should be pretty good, I just can't see it happening. If I'm wrong, it'd be pretty interesting. I'd be pretty excited to see what kind of offer they'd pulled up. If I'm Seattle, I'd be very careful with what the thing that just makes the whole thing complicated is most of these trades are going to come with first round picks. And you look at the Lions, a lot of people praised the Lions last year for trading Stafford. I actually hated what they did. We can talk about that another time, but they now got these. They had 2 first round picks. Well, that first round pick is 31st overall in a bad draft, or 32nd overall in a bad draft. The Jaguars got all this praise for getting 2 first round picks for Jalen Ramsey. Those picks became Travis Etienne and that pass rusher from LSU, Chason. Those guys are nothing. Jalen Ramsey's the best corner in football. So unless you're getting proven players or some sort of Godfather offer, a first round pick this year, even the 10th pick they gave up. I know there's some interesting guys. It's different than the 10th pick last year. I heard Daniel Jeremiah say the other day that there isn't a single guy in this draft that would have gone in the top 10 last year. So it's just so hard for me to sit back and say, wow, a first round pick this year would be really enticing, but that could be LJ Collier. And I don't think I would trade Russell unless you got just an absolute crazy offer.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of, you mentioned Indianapolis. They have Chris Ballard's been there 5 years now, and he comes in at 5 years, and Andrew Luck retires abruptly, and he's still looking for a quarterback. And they have a lot of the pieces, and they're not in a tough division, and they're just stuck in this process of, okay, we'll have Philip Rivers for a year. We'll trade a first round pick for Carson Wentz. Now the owner's outside a plane telling everybody that he's going to do whatever it takes. And then we hear over Super Bowl weekend, they're going to just cut the guy a year after spending a first round pick on him if they don't get a trade offer. Insane. And this is the problem. This is indicative of the issue. If you trade Russell Wilson, you could easily end up like Chris Ballard, who by all accounts is a great GM, but he just can't magic a quarterback out there. And that's the problem. And with Washington are in this. Washington have been waiting for a quarterback for how long? I mean, when's the last time Washington had a franchise quarterback? I mean, we're talking a long time ago, and they have traded 3 first-round picks for RG3 and a second rounder. 4 high picks for RG3, which Dan Schneider signed off on, as you mentioned, and then Dan Schneider made the current setup draft Dwayne Haskins because I think his son went to
that's a great example, yeah,
with Haskins. And now Snyder's saying you've got to go and get Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers or whoever, and they're going to have to go and do that. And it's just gonna look. Can I ask you, because there's one other thing on this I want to mention, but I did want to ask you this as well. If you were Carolyn Schneider, taking everything I've just said into account, but what would it take for you if you were them to accept a trade? What is the offer that would make you go, do you know what? Actually, yes, that is going to nudge me in the direction of the unknown at quarterback. I'll then have to go out and see if I can get whoever, a Cousins, take a chance on a rookie, go and get a stopgap, a Tyrod Taylor. I don't know. What is the offer that goes, that's turned my head enough?
Funny thing is, usually my offer would be around draft picks. I value the draft so much. What's one of the things that killed me about this regime? They've ruined the draft for me. But I think for them, I would want young, proven players. Sort of what we've seen with the Rams, where you can get, so say like the Raiders came with you and they offered you like Carr, Waller, Crosby, and a couple draft picks. that would really make me think, because that could make you just a better team than hoping that people sign in free agency. Where if you could fill that number one pass rusher spot, you add Darren Waller to DK Metcalf, like that's a crazy offense. And then you can get some first round picks out of them. That's the kind of thing I would want: proven players and picks and an answer quarterback. And unless you're getting like a young quarterback back, it's really hard to see how you can make this work, because you're not going to get like a Joe Burrow or a Herbert. They'd be absolutely bonkers to trade a 23-year-old quarterback for Russell at 35, and you're going to have to pay him in a year or two. So for me, like Washington, like they have Chase Young, right? But what closes that gap? Is it like 3 first-round picks and Chase Young? I don't think I would do that, because then you become Washington. And I think the Colts are the perfect example of this. And some of my closest friends in Toronto are Colts fans, so I probably know more about that team than the sane man should. But they have an incredible, like if you look at the team Chris Ballard inherited in 2017, I actually look at this on our lads sometimes. It was a terrible situation. Like they had one of the worst rosters. They've built up that roster. They kicked the crap out of some of those teams at the end of the year. They kicked the crap out of the Bills. They have an amazing roster, but they are in the quarterback purgatory that you talked about so well this year, Rob, when there was all that push to trade Russell Wilson. They have everything you want. They have Jonathan Taylor, Pittman, Buckner, Darius Leonard. Their team is ready to win, and this would be their 4th or 5th year in a row with a different quarterback. That's purgatory. And Zach Kiefer on The Athletic wrote an article about it today, how basically they're at the point now, because they haven't been able to get over the hump. They have, I think, 1 playoff win since Ballard got there, that they're looking at cutting Wentz because they can't trust him, or else they might lose their job. So I just can't imagine where you want to be in that situation where you actively choose. You look at the Dolphins, but Dan Marino, they still haven't replaced them. It took the Bills 20 years. The Bengals, they've taken forever. My buddy's a Vikings fan. He's got Kirk Cousins, and he can't stand them because they're stuck and they can't get better. And it's hard to get Kirk Cousins. So I would not actively choose to go into that purgatory unless I have to. And I just can't see an offer unless there's a path to a young quarterback. And I just don't see where that is.
I have not given this any thought whatsoever. As we've been talking about it, I've kind of formulated somewhat kind of an answer of my own. And I'll just say it very briefly. I think what I would do, the only way that I would ever consider an offer, is if you go into free agency with the full intention of being very aggressive and really improving this team, and just everything goes against you. Like Chandler Jones says, well, I love your offer and you pay me $3 million more a year, but it's always been my dream to play for the Vikings. So I'm going there. And you miss out. And then Von Miller stays with the Rams and Landry stays with Tennessee. And if it all just sort of, because it could happen, look, you can't make somebody sign for you. It's not a draft. It's not like the Seahawks get their first pick of the free agents. They have to actually convince these people to come and put a deal together, and they have to build a team. So if it goes against you emphatically, that is when I would think, look, I'm gonna listen to what's out there. And it would be after the league year begins when I'm thinking, okay, I can perhaps bring in some draft picks and get some guys, whatever, and we can move on, because this situation is going to get worse with Wilson, because I can feel my ears are burning with him and Mark Rogers talking about what we've done in free agency. And then I would have a look. And what I would want is, I would want a lot of picks and would want to take advantage of Washington. And for me, that would mean getting Chase Young, because you've not got the pass rusher that you wanted to get in free agency. And it would mean 1st round pick this year, 2nd round pick this year, 1st round pick next year, 2nd round pick next year, with the idea being that in a year that you get a quarterback in who can get you through this year, who you can talk up and say, we've always liked him from afar. But then next year you will have 2 firsts and 2 seconds if you want to move up for a quarterback. I know a lot of people love CJ Stroud. I do not. I think he's overrated. I think he's going to be the next bust from Ohio State, quite frankly. The guy at Alabama looks promising, but I'm still not 100% sold. Will Levis at Kentucky, I think, is a really, really interesting quarterback prospect. So if nothing else, if you get a year's time, you have got the stock. if needs be. And let's not forget, if you've got, let's say, Tyrod Taylor starting, you might be the number 1 overall pick anyway, or you might be the number 2 or the number 3. So you might not even have to trade up. But at least if you needed to get up from, let's say, 10, where they are now, you would have the stock to do that. And it would only take a team at number 1 who's already got a quarterback, let's say Jacksonville at number 1 again. Then you swap with them and you can get it. That's the only plan that I could tolerate moving on. And it comes with the, first of all, I'm going after him free agency, and this is plan B. That's the only way. And then at least that to me is a plan. But I'd rather just avoid all of this, Jeff, and all of this purgatory and everything, and just get a free agency in the bag where it generates the same excitement as 2013 when we were all pinching ourselves that Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill were coming in after they traded for Percy Harvin, which was a very exciting off-season. I just wanted to throw this quote your way because Jeremy Fowler wrote a piece a month ago. And within one of the quotes within the piece was from an AFC executive. I don't think they are as high on Wilson as they let on. You've got to remember they've looked into trading him multiple times now. You don't do that with a top guy unless you're comfortable with it. I think that quote is a perfect assessment of where John Schneider is. I don't think it is where Carroll and maybe Jody Allen are. I do wonder a bit who's calling the shots now, given what was said going into that meeting. But I don't think they're going to trade him. But I don't know. I mean, that when there's quotes like that, and it is true that John Schneider's, seems to be very open about trading Wilson with his moves over the last few years, and which is strange because he was basically Schneider's guy back in the day. I mean, is there any chance at all that the Seahawks are just playing a fantastic game here of saying no trade, no trade, no trade to drive up his cost? And all this, I hope I'm going to be here from Wilson, is perhaps indicative of him thinking the team are just going to move on.
I think you've got a perfect read on that. I think that it's been pretty telling over the years that John, he thinks very highly of Russell, but I don't think he thinks of the way he did coming out. There was a time where a lot of people believed that John thought Russell was the number 1 player in the NFL. And I think Chris Sims reported it, and I think they spent a lot of time looking at that year after 2017 where he started to fade on 3rd down, and they explored Josh Allen. And the year before they explored Patrick Mahomes. I think John, who came from Brett Favre, he likes those bigger, big arm quarterbacks. And I think John, from dealing with Mark Rodgers over the years and some of the issues they've had in contract, I think John sees a lot of value in just selling high. I think he thinks Russell's very good. I don't think he thinks he's as good as Rodgers and Russell think they are. So I do think that they're not as high on Russell. And I think John, there was pretty good indications that John was willing to trade him last year. I think just to get out of that whole thing. But from my understanding, Pete is the opposite. It's funny enough that the whole thing is teared into this Pete versus Russell thing. I think one of Pete's biggest flaws is that he's kind of gotten away from himself trying to help Russell. And by all indications, he's kind of screwed himself and screwed Russell. So I think Pete has been infatuated with Russell. I think a lot of the old Seahawks, one of the things that bothered them is that Pete babied Russell. And it's funny that this is teed up, and I think he's really the reason almost of every scenario I've talked about. I think the hardest thing to trade Russell is getting past Pete. And I think if John had full personnel control, and there was another quote of Jeremy Fowler a month later where someone like some league-wide source said that the Seahawks might switch personnel. I thought that came directly from the Seahawks front office. I think someone in the front office, could be John, it could be one of his assistants, is not happy with how much the coaches are having say in the draft, and they kind of gossiped and took some shots. So I think there are some interesting things to fall here. I think if John was in full control and they had a different coach, I think they'd be pretty open to trading him. I'd put the levels at like over 60%. So I think the hardest thing here, I think you're right on the money with that. I think that John would be much more open to trading him. I still think Pete is going to be the one who's going to block this whole thing.
Pete Carroll, forever scarred by the experience of having to have a year with Charlie Whitehurst and Tavares Jackson as his options, and he's never, ever going back to that by the looks of things. Very, very quickly to finish, Jeff, because I appreciate we've already gone 15 minutes over an hour. I just want to ask you very quickly on the draft. I'd love to get we've talked about a proven defensive end. I'm very open to getting a Calais Campbell type as well. And I'd still like to sort of look and see what's there in the draft too, because I think there's some great options at DE and DT. I think load up a D line. Have a great D line. If you can't get your offensive lineman in free agency, you've got the possibility of doing that as well in this draft. I mean, I love the idea of Abraham Lucas, who nobody seems to be mocking early, and I think he's a top 15 just because of his body type, his profile. I think he's going to be great at the combine. I think he's going to go a lot earlier than people think. But if he was there at 41 and he's already playing right tackle, I'd be down for a bit of that. But it looks to me like it's not a great draft at the top, but there's some options there for the Seahawks. So either you're going to get an offensive lineman, you're going to potentially keep adding to your pass rush. If you move on from Bobby Wagner, there's a load of linebacker options. I think there's a real deep class in day 3 running backs. I just think and there's even people like Cole Strange emerging, who played center at the Senior Bowl for the first time. He's kind of like this year's Quinn Miners, who Jim Nagy's now saying some teams are grading him in round 2. So you've even got a center emerging potentially as like a round 3 option. So, does that all make sense to you? That kind of a potential plan to work around. I just want to say one final thing, Ledger. I just want them to actually have addressed some holes by the time they get into the draft, so they can just go and get some talent. So, and definitely by training camp, I do not want another situation like cornerback last year, center last year, or pass rush the year before, where they're scrambling around looking for options.
Yeah, I said before that one of the things this regime has driven me crazy with their personnel. I don't have one of the reasons I started following football was I love just the whole personnel side. I love you can kind of see who's going to get cut, who might go. And their whole approach the last 3 years has just been bad. And it's not surprising they've kind of petered out. And the worst part is and this is all stuff we've talked about, their defensive line group, their pass rush, their cornerback group, the center, offensive line. They're drafting the wrong positions. They're drafting overage prospects. So I'm just hoping that they saw that what happened this year and they adjust their approach, because I think they are in a unique window where all of the young good quarterbacks are in the AFC. The NFC is pretty open. The Rams, there's a lot of talk of how they won and they went all in. They did do that, but they've also drafted really well in the mid to late rounds. And they've hit on a lot of second round picks, and they've done really well in the 3rd to 4th round in the draft, and they just keep stockpiling their roster with homegrown players. And I don't think the Rams are as good as a lot of people making it out to be. And they had a pretty crappy game in the Super Bowl, and they would have lost to most teams. So I think the Seahawks are right there. Like, the Seahawks played the Rams week 15, and it was very similar to the Super Bowl game. The way it went, it was very similar. So the Seahawks, I think there's a great opportunity. Their draft capital is a little overstated. They have a high 2, a high 3, and 2 high 4s. That's pretty much where most of their usual drafts are when they trade out of the first round. So I think there's capital to do a fine job here. And I think, as you said, the draft plays into their strengths. They don't have the top 10 player they badly need. That doesn't in this draft. They look at guys who are going to go like the 10 to 15 range. Like, if you look at last year's draft, you could have got Micah Parsons or Rashawn Slater. Those are all pros, like in their first year. Those are not the kind of guys in this draft. So when they're picking in round 2, 3, 4, there's guys edge rush, right tackle, center that really fit their roster. So I think the draft really does line up them, as long as they don't do their usual thing and get too cute and overthink it and try to be the smartest guy in the room. Because there's a lot of depth in this draft. Tight end might be a great spot to hit in this draft. There's all kinds of spots. If they add another running back in the late rounds, add more corners, there's a lot of elements to this team that kind of line up, because they're not going to get that top 10 guy because of the Adams trade. So spend the money on a pass rusher, maybe in free agency, and then hit other spots in the draft, because if they don't get a right tackle, there's some good options. That should be a very logical spot at their first pick in the 2nd round.
I love the fact that there's really good guys in this draft that no one's talking about, and it feels like a while since that's happened. Like Monteric Brown, who's the corner at Arkansas, got 5 picks last year. No one talks about him. It was back in the day. No one was talking about Cam Chancellor and people like that, and Sherman, and just, I don't know. Maybe they can have a bit of look. And you just very finally, you mentioned the Rams. They're not that good a team. I mean, it's easy to forget. This is their run from, these are just games that they had since November. They were well beaten by the Titans, 28-16. They were hammered by the Niners, 31-10. They lost to the Niners in mid-November. They then lost to the Packers, 36-28. They scraped by the Cardinals when the Cardinals were no good on the 14th of December. They beat the Seahawks in a rearranged game. They scraped by the Vikings by a touchdown. They beat the Ravens, who were slumping by that point by a
with
point.
their backup quarterback.
With a backup quarterback who went, I think was that one of the games where they went for 2 right at the end, or
Yeah,
they were going for 2. They won by a point. They could have easily have blown that. They then lost to the Niners. They threw that game away in week 18, and yeah, okay, the Cardinals by that point, and we all know what they're imploding now, and we're in the middle of their implosion when they lost in the playoffs. But then they nearly blew the Tampa Bay game. They nearly threw that away. They were 10 points down against the Niners and playing like crap. I mean, I'd written off the Rams in that game, Jeff. I don't know about you. I was thinking the Niners were in the Super Bowl. And then in the Super Bowl, it was kind of like the Bengals are going to win this. And then right at the end, it was like they had one drive and it was like, oh, the Rams have won. And it still kind of feels a bit like, what a peculiar run. Like the Bucs were unstoppable, like it felt a year ago. They were kind of like this runaway train. And you see other teams that really build towards it. The Chiefs, for example, when they won it, this Rams team just kind of, it's almost like they won it by default.
They had one of the most fortunate and lucky playoff runs I've almost ever seen. It was a lot like some of those like New York Giants. If you look at a lot of the things that happened, just watching the Super Bowl on Sunday, I was kind of bothered by it. All things being equal, I'm a Seahawks fan. The Rams give us more problems than any other team, so I don't like the Rams. But I just felt like I was watching like an inferior competition. The whole game just kind of bothered me. On one side, you had the Bengals, who looked like the Tom Cable Seahawks on the offensive line. Like we've seen what happens when you can't block Aaron Donald and the Rams. We've seen that game for years. But on the Rams, they had the lowest rushing production game, I think, per EPA and in playoff history. And they kept sticking. If you follow Seahawks Twitter, I'm sure some of your listeners do, like the most hated game in Seahawks Twitter history isn't that Super Bowl loss. It's the game against the Cowboys in 2018 where Pete Carroll and Brian Schottenheimer had like the most frustrating game plan. If you followed this game, it almost mimicked it perfectly. Just at the Seahawks couldn't stop Dak in that game on 3rd and 17 or something, and they just would have had one drive they could have won, and that was the same game. But you look like the Niners game, they're up 17-7. They make it a game, but Jaquiski Tartt drops the interception. That is right in his hands. It was like a moon ball that like I could have caught that. And then Kyle Shanahan punts on 4th and 1 from the 50. They should have lost that game. Tampa Bay, they played well in that game, but they almost blew a huge lead. Where Tampa Bay had one of the stupidest defensive calls at the end of a game I've ever seen in my life. They called an all-out blitz with 20 seconds left in a clear overtime situation. And that was a Bucs team that had Antonio Brown quit midseason and Chris Godwin was out. So they were hammered. And the Bengals game, like they played like crap for most of the game, but they just had the most perfect mismatch on paper. The Rams D-line against the Bengals O-line they should have crushed that game. They should have won 20 points. I thought they'd win by 20 points. So you hear this talk of like Matt Stafford is a Hall of Famer and Sean McVay is like the greatest coach alive. It's been bothering me because the Rams, they're a good team, but just watching the Super Bowl, like if they played the Bills or the Chiefs, I think they would have got crushed.
Yeah, a good team, yeah, and worthy winners because if you win the Super Bowl, you're a worthy winner, aren't you? But I just found a little strange. This run that they have had. So and look, I think if Aaron Rodgers and it doesn't snow at Lambeau, and if they don't have that block punt, if the Green Bay special teams isn't the worst in the league by a mile, then they could have been playing Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, they avoided Green Bay, Buffalo, and the Chiefs.
Yeah, wow. Right, Jeff, it's been amazing. Look, appreciate your time because we've gone well over an hour in the end. So much appreciated for your time. It always is really appreciated. I know everybody loves hearing from you and some great talking points today. We're going to have a really good stream next week as well. It's an interesting one. It's a little bit different. So stay tuned for that. Awesome. Details forthcoming. Subscribe to the channel, share it around, like the video as well. We'll see you next time. Enjoy the off season.